It's clear from the short film Damien Chazelle made as a proof of concept that Whiplash really hinges on one performance. Yes, Miles Teller is fantastic in the feature-length version of the film, but without the right Terence Fletcher pushing him and driving the central conflict of the story, the movie's themes wouldn't crystallize. In fact, Chazelle's storytelling is completely orchestrated around the strength of this performance. When Fletcher walks into the room, he puts a heavy focus on the other character's reaction, their respect, admiration, and fear. It's shot like a celebrity has just arrived, because for all the musicians in that room, their careers, their self-esteem, and by extension their lives, are in his hands. This is all that matters. The role requires the exact precision and excellence that the character would demand of himself. So if Simmons couldn't make good on the promise the editing is making with the viewer, the film would have fallen flat. Jonathan Kimball Simmons, also known as That Guy in That Thing, had built an impressive career of bit parts. With a whopping 228 title credits, J.K. has worked with some of the best in the business, but usually only appearing as a small supportive role. You would always enjoy his natural charisma, but there was never a particular demand or suspicion that he could or should be the main character of a story. But then things changed when he fell in love with a script called Whiplash, written by this unknown 28-year-old, and the role seemed made for Simmons due to his musical background.
I went to music school. I have a degree in music. I thought I was going to be a composer and conductor.
Oh my God.
And my father was a choir conductor.
But a small jazz film didn't exactly sound like box office gold. The only way they were ever going to get it off the ground was to shoot a no-budget short film to sell the concept to investors. So J.K. took a chance on it, with no guarantee that this will ever be turned into a feature, and no real way of knowing if he'll still be cast if it does, as oftentimes producers will insist on hiring someone with more box office clout. But based on the strength of his delivery and Chazelle's script, the project was greenlit. And it was now, at the age of 59, that he would deliver the strongest performance of his career to date, which earned him every award you could think of for Best Supporting Actor. So he was no longer just that guy in that thing, he was now the guy in the breakout film of the year. But what is it about this performance that made it resonate so strongly? Let's take a deeper look at how J.K. Simmons perfected Terence Fletcher in Whiplash. The first key is the physicality of the character. We don't consciously think about it, but how a character feels when they walk into a room is something each viewer immediately detects. As we already noted, Chazelle is telling the story of Terence Fletcher through the other characters' reactions. But let's look at what J.K. adds to it.
What have you been practicing?
Simmons doesn't knock, he doesn't enter meekly, he waltzes in like he owns the place, allowing the doors to crash open on either side, so his presence is heard. His confident stride communicates that I have arrived and I am all that matters. Chazelle makes the room fall silent to emphasize the towering presence that Fletcher possesses, and Simmons manages to create this aura around him where it's as if no other character exists until he decides they do. When it came to preparation, the actor stated, "But in terms of fleshing out the character, honestly, we had no time for rehearsal, no budget for rehearsal. There was very little discussion of how to play the character, where the character is coming from, or what the character wants, because it was all just so clear on the page." And while it is true that Chazelle's script captures the viciousness of the character, Simmons is selling himself short in how he brought Fletcher to life. He made subtle physical choices that made the character feel even more butch and aggressive. For instance, he was the one who insisted on wearing a tight black t-shirt instead of the director's original choice of white. Aside from black being more jazz, this colour also identifies the tone of the character. He is dark, he's unpredictable, and he is to be feared. Also, the script never mentions the iconic way Fletcher closes his fist to stop the music, like he's grabbing the sound out of your hands and suffocating it in his tight grip. All of Simmons' body language reads superior. It even feels like he's constantly flexing to make himself appear more imposing. and he regularly adopts the power pose with his hand on his hips to display his authority. These little decisions make a big difference in how each moment feels for the audience. Without them, he's just a man in a room saying things at fluctuating volumes. But with them, the performance grabs our attention and doesn't let it go. For instance here, in this scene Fletcher appears to be at his kindest and most encouraging, innocently asking Andrew about his family to inspect his new pupil up close. But with one small move, J.K. makes the scene more claustrophobic. When we describe an actor as having a large presence, usually we mean they're visibly in control, and it can be felt in every inch of the screen. So as small a thing as it may seem, by planting his hand against the wall, J.K. is making this peaceful scene feel intimidating, as he's essentially cornered him and caged him for the duration of this conversation. Which pays off later when we discover he's using Andrew's answers to emotionally abuse him. This leads into the second key, intimidation and dismissal. Fletcher wants you to fear disappointing him while also making his approval unattainable. As if nothing is ever good enough, you'll just have to get better. So if you're doing your job right, you'll go unnoticed. But if you're making a mistake, you will draw his ire. Like the scene where one player's instrument is out of tune, and Fletcher unforgivingly has to sniff out the rat. First, Simmons points to each section to play. The mistake isn't in the first section, so he cuts them off and swiftly moves to the next. But notice how his reaction is different the second time around.
5, 6, and...
Hearing the slightly incorrect music causes him to clench his fist more aggressively, and his head raises up as if to say, "Uh-huh, I was right," with his nose tilted up like he can physically smell the rat. Another thing to note is how all the other characters routinely look away to avoid his gaze, as once Fletcher locks onto his target, you become the subject of his abuse. We see this when Andrew is rushing the tempo, and Simmons intimidatingly paces up to him. In one terrifying move, he goes from a faraway threat, throwing chairs, to directly in his face, and is soon slapping him repeatedly to cement a harsh lesson. So similar to when he cornered him earlier, everything just gets more and more enclosed, intimate, and unescapable. And once Chazelle has established that Fletcher may assault the students, the stakes are raised, and now the audience are always on edge, waiting for the next outburst. This animalistic, snarling side to the character is exactly what Chazelle wanted. During the drum-off scene, his script reads, "Fletcher stands still, stares at him, circles the drum like a predatory beast, ready to strike at any instant." And then when he's finally done belittling his victims, how does he dismiss them? Without even looking at them. They become invisible again. We see this when he kicks out the out-of-tune player. And again when he berates a crew member for almost interrupting his speech. And one last time when he demotes Andrew and tells him that if he wants the part, he has to earn it. It's a performance of contrast. Either he doesn't see you and you don't deserve to exist, or he hones in on you and unleashes like a wild beast. And this leads into the final key, screaming. Simmons' performance is reminiscent of an army drill sergeant, making it the Full Metal Jacket of jazz drumming.
Hey, you little maggot! You make me want to vomit!
But just screaming over and over doesn't automatically make a performance good. You have to set the table before you knock it over. Part of what makes Whiplash such an effective piece of filmmaking is that it blurs the line between mentor and abuser. The very person that's helping you to become the most talented version of yourself is the one that's hurting you the most, drawing a direct line between greatness and pain. Being the best is not a gift you are handed, it is a price you have paid. And although not everyone will become great, Terence Fletcher's goal is to find out how good you can be. But in order to do that, one way or the other, he must take his pound of flesh. Therefore J.K. plays it like nothing is good enough, like he's physically pissed off at you for not trying harder, for squandering your potential. So when the room falls silent, Chazelle essentially gives his actor the space to do what he wants in between the lines. And to fill those gaps, Simmons uses these angry breaths to command the silence. Not only do these deep, fizzling breaths hold our attention for their duration, but they add tension to each moment, as this feels like a technique that the character learned from an anger management class, which only makes it more intimidating, as his rage must be so intense that it clearly doesn't work.
Why do you suppose I just hurled a chair at your head, Neiman?
Shouting only has an impact if it isn't established as the status quo, so before a real scream is uncorked, it's usually led into with an eerie sense of calm.
Do you think you're out of tune?
No one else is speaking, and Fletcher, although annoyed, appears to be operating within regular decibels. And then boom.
Then why the fuck didn't you say so?
Simmons' roar echoes into the rafters. He's blowing the roof off the place. And it's the proximity of the screaming that gives it the greatest impact. He's not yelling from across the room, he's howling so close to your face that you can feel his breath and see the back of his teeth. And by leading into it in this calmer, quieter tone, it essentially functions as a dramatic jump scare, so that the viewer, just like the victim, becomes frozen still in shock, like a deer in headlights. That's what stays with an audience. They may not remember what the character said, but they remember how they made them feel. And J.K. Simmons successfully terrifies them. But although Terence Fletcher's backstory is never stated, between what Chazelle put on the page and Simmons embodied on screen, we can infer that he once had large dreams of his own. Dreams that have since long passed, but he's never really moved on from. So you can actually view each bullying scene as an older man attacking a younger version of himself, as if his abusive teaching style is merely an expression of his own self-hatred, resentful that he never had a mentor that could have pushed him hard enough to be an all-time great. And that makes Fletcher a cautionary tale to every artist, to give it everything they can while they can, as otherwise they too could be sidelined to live a life of bitter what-ifs, enraged what-could-have-beens, and an uncomfortable awareness of what just isn't good enough. As why else would a man hold such contempt for the words, "good job"? But in the case of J.K. Simmons, when his opportunity finally came along to stand out from the pack, he didn't just turn up and settle for good enough. He delivered a blistering, pitch-perfect performance that will inspire generations to come, as he's proved that it's never too late to show you're capable of more. Well, if you've made it this far, firstly, thank you for watching, but if you could now give the video a like, possibly even leave a comment and click on that subscribe button, it will encourage that mysterious algorithm to do its thing.